Atlanta PD, open the door. We've received a report of an assault on an elderly woman. Imani Washington was ripped from her sleep by the hard banging on the door. For a few seconds, she couldn't figure out where she was. The digital clock glowed. 4:17 a.m. The space beside her was an empty hollow in the sheets. Jamal had already left the bedroom. From the foyer, she could hear the sobbing of Mama Rose and the deep rumble of men's voices. Imani threw on a robe and saw her mother-in-law on the landing. Mama Rose was clutching her chest, breathing in ragged gasps, and holding onto the doorframe for support. A dented pot lay on the floor. A fresh, white scratch marred the paint on the wall near the guest room. Jamal stood beside his mother, staring grimly at his wife, as if the police weren't there to investigate, but to haul away the guilty party he'd already condemned. "That's her," whispered Mama Rose. "Don't get too close. She ain't herself today." Imani's gaze shifted to the two police officers. The senior one introduced himself as Officer Davis and asked everyone to speak one at a time. Mama Rose immediately launched into her story, claiming Imani had blasted music, started throwing dishes, and then began pounding on her bedroom door. Her mother-in-law swore she had only asked for quiet, but Imani had supposedly called her an old mooch and demanded she get out of the condo immediately. At the mention of the insults, Mama Rose covered her face with her hands. She spoke just loud enough for the neighbors, who were already peeking from behind their cracked-open doors, to hear every word. Jamal wrapped an arm around his mother's shoulders and confirmed that his wife had been irritable and not always in control of herself for the past few weeks. "Jamal, are you serious right now?" Imani stared at him, still holding onto a sliver of hope that he would stop this. "Don't you even start," her husband snapped. "My mama's not going to call the police in the middle of the night for no reason. And where were you when I was supposedly smashing dishes?" He averted his eyes and mumbled that he was in the bathroom. According to him, he first heard a crash, then his mother's scream, and by the time he came out, Imani had already locked herself in the bedroom. Mama Rose quickly added that she was afraid to go in and check on her daughter-in-law because Imani might have hit her. A chill that had nothing to do with the draft washed over Imani. 4 months ago, her mother-in-law had come to stay for 2 weeks after a medical checkup. Since then, she had taken over the guest room, rearranged the kitchen cabinets to her liking, and constantly told Jamal that a grown woman needed to be the true mistress of the house. But until tonight, her nitpicking hadn't escalated to a police report. Officer Davis asked to see the source of the music. Mama Rose pointed to Imani's phone, which was on the nightstand in the bedroom. The screen was locked. The Bluetooth speaker sat silent and turned off by the window. Imani opened her music app and showed the connection history. The speaker had last been used the previous evening when she was listening to a podcast while cleaning up. Then, she opened her sleep tracking app. The phone had recorded that she went to bed at 11:36 p.m. and hadn't gotten up until the police arrived. Officer Davis warned that the app's data didn't prove anything on its own. Imani agreed. She wasn't trying to convince them with a single graph. It was more important that they record the exact time and plant the first seed of doubt in her mother-in-law's story. "Who dented the pot?" the younger officer asked. "She threw it at my door," Mama Rose answered instantly. "From the kitchen to my room." Her mother-in-law faltered. "The kitchen was at the opposite end of the hallway," Jamal interjected, suggesting his mother might have kicked the pot out of the way as she ran onto the landing. Imani looked closely at the pot's handles. One of them had a streak of white powder from the fresh scratch on the door. It meant the pot wasn't just thrown, its metal handle had been scraped against the paint. But Imani kept silent. If she pointed it out now, Mama Rose would have time to invent an explanation. It was far more useful to remember who had said what in front of witnesses. Officer Davis asked everyone to come to the kitchen and write a statement. Mama Rose sat down first, still clutching her heart. Imani offered to call an ambulance, but her mother-in-law sharply refused, claiming she didn't need doctors as long as her daughter-in-law stopped tormenting her. Jamal placed a blank sheet of paper in front of his wife and ordered her to write that she admitted to the argument and promised not to make noise anymore. The officer stopped him, noting that everyone had to give their statement in their own words. Jamal then leaned closer to Imani and whispered that she'd better not be stubborn if his mother decided to file a report for threats. The consequences would be a whole lot worse. Mama Rose heard him and sobbed even louder, as if he'd just given her a cue for her next accusation. Imani stated only the facts. At 10:10 p.m., she returned from work. At 10:40 p.m., she finished dinner and cleaned the dishes. At 11:15 p.m., she spoke with her colleague Keisha, then went to bed. She had not turned on any music, had not touched the pot, and had not gone near her mother-in-law's room. She asked to attach the information about her call with Keisha and to note that the scratch on the door looked fresh. Jamal sneered, calling it her accountant's habit of turning her family into a balance sheet. Mama Rose declared that living with such a cold woman was scarier than living with an openly hysterical one. Imani signed her statement and took a photo of the sheet with her phone. For a second, she caught her mother-in-law and husband exchanging a look. They clearly expected her to be more frightened. The police didn't try to determine guilt in the middle of the night. Officer Davis warned everyone about the responsibility for disturbing the peace and for providing false information. He took down the contact information of the neighbors, but most had already closed their doors, wanting no part in a family dispute. Before leaving, he said the report would be passed to the precinct detective, and if there was another call, they would review the previous statements. Mama Rose immediately asked, "Can Imani be temporarily removed from the condo for the safety of an elderly person?" Officer Davis replied that without legal grounds, no one could evict an owner from their own property. Her mother-in-law's lips tightened. It was the first genuine emotion on her face. Not fear or pain, but the pure irritation of not getting what she wanted. The moment the front door closed, Mama Rose instantly stopped crying. She straightened her back, dropped her hand from her chest, and looked at her daughter-in-law with a calmness that suggested she had just finished a rehearsal. Jamal collected the papers from the table and announced that in the morning, they would discuss the new rules of living together. Imani reminded him that the condo belonged to both of them and rules couldn't be set behind her back. Her husband shot back that ownership didn't give her the right to abuse his mother. Then he suggested she pack a bag and spend the night at Keisha's. That, he said, would prove her good intentions and help avoid a second police call. "So, your mother stays in my home and I'm the one who has to leave?" Imani asked. "Just for a few days until you calm down." "I was sleeping, Jamal. That's just your side of it." Mama Rose picked up the dented pot, inspected the damage, and said with annoyance that a good piece of cookware would now have to be thrown away. Then she added that a decent daughter-in-law would have offered to pay for the damages herself. Imani was about to respond but noticed a tiny detail near the door. On the inside of the pot were dried flecks of grits, even though she had personally washed all the dishes after dinner and set them to dry. Mama Rose had used this pot later. That meant her mother-in-law had either deliberately taken it out after Imani went to bed, or she never expected anyone to check the small details. Jamal grabbed his wife's elbow and tried to lead her to the bedroom. Imani pulled her arm away. He lowered his voice and said that one more incident like this would create problems for her, not just with the neighbors. If someone called her job and reported that their accounting manager was having nightly brawls and threatening a senior citizen, management would certainly question whether she could be trusted with the company's money. Mama Rose stood silently in the hallway, but a fleeting smile touched her lips. Imani understood. The police call wasn't a random outburst. Mother and son already knew what they would use as leverage next: the condo, her job, and the reputation of a woman who had supposedly lost control. Imani locked herself in the bedroom but didn't go to bed. She photographed the pot, the scratch, the position of the furniture, and the screen of her sleep tracking app. Then she texted Keisha, asking her to save the time of their evening call. Through the wall, she could hear muffled voices. Mama Rose was asking why the police hadn't forced her daughter-in-law to leave. Jamal replied that things like this don't get solved on the first try and they needed to be patient. Imani turned on her phone's recorder, but the conversation had already ended. A few minutes later, her husband knocked and demanded she open the door. She didn't answer. A copy of her statement slid under the door, followed by a warning. "In the morning, you're going to have to make a choice anyway." Her phone vibrated with a short buzz. It was a message from Miss Evelyn, the neighbor from across the hall. They barely spoke, just polite hellos by the elevator and occasionally accepting packages for each other. Imani opened the message and felt the last traces of sleep vanish. "Don't you sign a thing and don't you leave that condo. My doorbell camera recorded who was really banging that pot against the door." A few seconds later, Miss Evelyn sent a still image. The timestamp at the bottom read 12:31 a.m. Imani wasn't in the picture. Standing in front of their door was Mama Rose, wearing her satin sleep bonnet and holding the pot in one hand and a metal lid in the other. Her mother-in-law was staring directly into the dark landing, preparing to strike again. But the most chilling part was something else. Standing behind her was Jamal. He was holding his mother's phone, calmly waiting for her to finish creating the noise they were about to blame on his wife. "Sign this saying you won't scare my mother anymore, and pack your things by this evening." Jamal placed the paper in front of Imani before she had even finished her coffee. It was 7 a.m. Mama Rose sat by the window wearing a gray shawl, even though the house was warm, and slowly stirred sugar into her tea. The nighttime terror had vanished from her face, but she maintained a pained look for her son's benefit. The paper was already dated with Imani's name printed at the top. All she had to do was admit that she had repeatedly disturbed the peace, shown aggression towards an elderly person, and voluntarily agreed to live elsewhere for 2 weeks. Below, Jamal had left a space for her signature. "This isn't a confession," he said. "It's just a family agreement." "Then why is it written like a statement for the police?" Jamal snatched the paper and flipped it over, as if the words might disappear. "Because there's no other way to deal with you. You twist every single word." Mama Rose quietly murmured that her blood pressure had spiked during the night. She refused to measure it. She didn't want to call an ambulance again, but she did demand that Imani pay for a new pot and the repair of the door. When her daughter-in-law mentioned the camera across the hall, her mother-in-law froze for only a second. Then she shrugged and said the doorbell camera only films the landing. The argument, she claimed, had started inside the condo. Jamal backed his mother up. According to him, the still image could have captured the moment Mama Rose was cleaning up the mess after Imani's outburst. They clearly didn't know how much the camera had actually recorded. Imani decided not to tell them. "I'm not signing anything, and I'm not going anywhere," she said. "Now take this paper with its false accusations off my table." Jamal crumpled the sheet, but didn't throw it away. He shoved it into the pocket of his robe and warned that her stubbornness would only make things worse. If she didn't agree to leave voluntarily, his mother would file an official complaint. Mama Rose added that the neighbors had been complaining about the noise for a long time and would surely back up her story. It sounded confident, almost rehearsed. Imani remembered how her mother-in-law had gone out onto the landing several times in recent weeks to talk to other residents. At the time, she thought Mama Rose just liked to gossip. Now it was clear. She was scouting for people to feed her version of events. Near the elevator, Imani ran into a neighbor from the 5th floor. The woman gave a strained hello and immediately asked if everything was okay with her nerves. It turned out Mama Rose had already told her that her daughter-in-law screams at night, breaks dishes, and won't let an elderly person sleep. She had supposedly hidden it for weeks because she didn't want to ruin her son's reputation. Imani didn't try to defend herself. She simply asked if the neighbor had heard her voice last night. The woman admitted she had only heard a metallic clanging and Mama Rose's own shouts. The elevator arrived, and the woman hurried inside, as if even that admission could drag her into trouble. At work, Imani immediately called Keisha. Her colleague confirmed that they had been on the phone the previous night from 11:15 p.m. to 11:34 p.m., and Imani had been in her bedroom the entire time. Keisha promised to save her call log and texts. Then she asked if Imani needed help with a place to stay. Imani thanked her, but declined. "If I leave now, they'll say I admitted I was guilty. You think they want the condo? I think they want me out of it." The words sounded chillingly real now that she'd said them aloud. After the call, Imani opened her banking app. The mortgage payments for the last 3 years had been almost entirely debited from her checking account. They had made the down payment together after the wedding, but a significant portion of it came from money Imani had inherited after selling her grandmother's house. Jamal had always called the condo ours, until it became necessary to decide who had to leave it. At lunch, he sent her a text. "I found you an option. You can stay with Keisha until Mama calms down. 2 weeks isn't forever." A minute later, a second message arrived. "If you refuse, I can't be responsible for what happens next." Imani took screenshots and saved them to the cloud. Then she wrote to Miss Evelyn. The neighbor suggested they meet in the evening when Jamal was at the gym. She hadn't shown the video to anyone yet, but had already copied it from her home recorder. "Miss?" Evelyn specifically asked her not to warn Mama Rose. Her mother-in-law had rung her doorbell earlier, asking if the camera had trouble recording in the dark. It meant Mama Rose was getting worried. But instead of backing down, she continued to act as if she was certain her age and tears would be more convincing than any recording. That evening, Imani came home earlier than usual. Mama Rose wasn't there. She had gone to the pharmacy. Jamal was on the phone on the balcony and didn't hear his wife open the closet in the small room where they kept their documents. The folder with the deed to the condo had been moved to the top shelf. Next to it were copies of their passports, Imani's income statements, and a printout with the approximate market value of the condo. Someone had gathered them all together very recently. The printer on the desk was running. The corner of a page stuck out from the output tray. Imani pulled out the paper and saw the heading, Pattern of Disturbances by Imani Washington. Below were 6 dates. Next to each was a description. Loud music after midnight, banging on walls, insults toward an elderly person, thrown dishes, threats to kick Mama Rose out onto the street. The last line referred to the previous night, but Imani immediately recognized 2 of the other dates. On one of those days, she had been at an accounting seminar in Charlotte and only returned the following evening. On another, she had worked until midnight during a quarterly report. Her badge scans at the office security gates were recorded by the electronic system. At the bottom of the document was a phrase, "These incidents are systematic in nature and can be used in resolving disputes regarding living arrangements." Behind her, the balcony door creaked. "Are you digging through my papers?" Jamal asked. Imani managed to photograph the sheet and put it back. "My income statements and a copy of my passport are here. I'm gathering documents for the bank. They had questions. The bank needs a list of my nightly rampages." Jamal walked closer and snatched the paper from the printer. First, he claimed it was a draft of his mother's statement. Then he said the dates were just approximate. When Imani reminded him about her business trip, her husband smirked. Mama Rose might have mixed up the date, but that didn't mean the other incidents didn't happen. He was talking too fast and kept glancing at the door. Jamal wasn't afraid of his wife's accusations. He was afraid his mother would come back and see the document in his hands. "Why do you need to resolve disputes about living arrangements?" Imani asked. "To establish some normal rules." "And why did that require the value of the condo and my income statements?" "Because I'm tired of paying for everything myself." The lie was so blatant that Imani barely stopped herself from laughing. She offered to open their mortgage payment history right then and there. Jamal refused. He declared that money in a marriage isn't divided into his and hers, but a second later demanded she respect his right to decide the fate of their home as the man of the house. At that moment, a key turned in the lock. Mama Rose entered with a bag from the pharmacy, saw the document, and immediately understood what had happened. "I knew she'd go through the closet," her mother-in-law said. "A guilty person always looks for what evidence has been gathered against them." Instead of answering, Imani asked her to name a single insult she had supposedly hurled during her business trip. Mama Rose was momentarily flustered but quickly recovered, claiming she heard her daughter-in-law's voice from the room. Maybe she was calling Jamal and yelling on speakerphone. Her husband looked down. On that particular night, he had been at a friend's house and returned in the morning. If he confirmed his mother's story, he'd have to explain his own absence. Imani saw the first crack appear between them. Their story only held up as long as no one compared the dates and details. At dinner, Mama Rose deliberately talked about the police and repeated that a second call could no longer be considered an accident. Then she stood up, took an empty plate from the table, and went to the kitchen. A minute later, the crash of a falling chair echoed from the room. "Imani, stop it!" her mother-in-law screamed. Her daughter-in-law didn't even get up. She turned on her phone's voice recorder and placed it next to her cup. Jamal ran into the kitchen. Nothing was broken. A chair lay on its side, and Mama Rose stood beside it, gripping its back with both hands. "Why did you knock it over?" her son asked quietly. "I didn't knock it over, she pushed it." "Imani is at the table. She must have pushed it earlier." Jamal turned and saw the phone on the table. Its microphone pointed toward the kitchen. His face changed. "Turn off the recording." "Why is your mother claiming I attacked her again? Let's get an accurate version of events." He tried to grab the phone, but Imani managed to slip it into her pocket. Jamal then called her an instigator and demanded she not drag the police into family matters, as if she had been the one to make the call last night. Mama Rose picked up the chair and whispered that the next night, the neighbors would definitely hear the truth. Imani said nothing. She realized her mother-in-law wouldn't stop. She needed one more episode, one more page for her pre-prepared folder. Late that evening, Imani waited until her mother-in-law and husband had gone to their rooms and stepped out onto the landing. "Miss..." Evelyn cracked her door open, quickly let her in, and locked both bolts. On her kitchen table sat a laptop with a memory card plugged in. "Miss..." Evelyn said that at first, she only wanted to show the recording from last night, but in the morning, she decided to check the entire archive. "Imani, this didn't start yesterday," she said. "Your mother-in-law has come out here with cookware at least 3 times. Sometimes Jamal was standing right there with her. Sometimes she did it all by herself." On the screen were 4 folders with different dates. 2 of them matched the list of disturbances Imani had just found in the printer. One corresponded to the evening she was in Charlotte. "Miss..." Evelyn moved the cursor to the first file, but before playing the recording, she looked at her neighbor. There's something worse than the noise. After one of these performances, Mama Rose came to my door with a statement already written out. She wanted me to confirm in writing that it was you who was smashing the dishes. Your mother-in-law brought me a typed statement and just told me to sign it. Miss Evelyn opened the camera file on her laptop. In the video, Mama Rose stood in front of her door in a housecoat, holding a clear plastic folder. She was complaining that Imani supposedly threw tantrums every night, and Jamal was too scared to stand up to his wife. Then, her mother-in-law pulled out the pre-printed sheet and asked her neighbor to confirm that she had heard Imani's voice specifically. Miss Evelyn refused, explaining that through walls and closed doors, it's impossible to tell who is shouting. Mama Rose then told her not to be so picky with the words, and reminded her how Jamal had helped the residents move a heavy wardrobe. It didn't sound like the plea of a frightened woman, but like an attempt to buy a favorable testimony with a small favor. The recordings from the other days were even more damning. In the first, Mama Rose came out onto the landing with a metal lid and struck the railing with it 3 times. Then she went back into the condo and almost immediately started shouting, demanding that her daughter-in-law stop the noise. In the second, Jamal held the door open while his mother scraped the paint near the lock with the handle of a pot. He wasn't stopping her, he was watching to make sure no neighbors came out. The third video was filmed on the evening Imani was in Charlotte. Mama Rose deliberately dropped a pot, knocked on her own bedroom door, and then called someone, saying her daughter-in-law was acting up again. Imani stared at the screen in silence. There was no more random lie. There were several rehearsals of the exact same accusation. Why didn't you say something sooner? She asked. Miss Evelyn looked down. Since her husband's death, she had lived alone and was afraid of conflict. Mama Rose had hinted several times that she could complain about her loud television and old air conditioner. Moreover, Jamal was on the condo board and knew how to turn a personal dislike into an official problem. Miss Evelyn had hoped the mother and son would stop on their own, but after the police call, she realized her silence was no longer helping the victim, but those who were creating false evidence. She gave Imani a copy of the entire archive and agreed to provide a written statement. Imani asked her not to tell anyone about it yet. If Jamal found out the recordings existed, he would change his tactics. She needed to understand why they were so desperate to push her out of the condo right now. The next morning, Imani arrived at work an hour early. She uploaded the videos to a secure work server, saved a second copy to the cloud, and sent herself emails with the file creation dates. Keisha helped her get a printout of her keycard access logs. On one of the nights listed as a breakdown, Imani had been in the office until 1:18 a.m. Her travel documents confirmed her absence on another day. She also requested a detailed call log from her cell carrier. The chain of evidence was lining up perfectly. During the hours of the fabricated fights, she was either talking to her colleague or was hundreds of miles from home. But Imani felt no relief. The more convincing their lies became, the clearer it was that the police calls were just a tool. Keisha gave her the number of a lawyer she knew. Mr. Henderson listened to her story, looked at the copy of the list, and explained that a few complaints on their own wouldn't strip an owner of their right to live in the condo. But systematic reports, neighbor testimonies, and medical records could be used as leverage during a divorce or a dispute over the sale of a share, especially if a person was coerced into moving out voluntarily and then made to sign an agreement on unfavorable terms. The lawyer advised Imani not to leave the condo, not to sign any confessions, and to collect evidence of every demand. He also asked her to bring the purchase agreement for the condo, mortgage information, and documents related to the down payment. They can't just take your share, he said. So they need you to decide for yourself that selling cheap is your only way out. That phrase explained the printout of the condo's value. After the consultation, Imani ordered an independent preliminary appraisal. Similar condos in their area were selling for $350,000 to $400,000. The document she had seen near the printer listed a value just over $300,000. It meant Jamal knew the real price perfectly well. That evening, Imani checked the family folder with the mortgage papers. The agreement was there, but the copies of the documents proving the origin of her down payment were gone. The originals were safe in a safe deposit box, and her husband couldn't get to them. But the very fact that the copies were missing meant that Jamal was already separating the papers that benefited him from those that strengthened his wife's position. Mama Rose greeted her daughter-in-law with uncharacteristic warmth. She had made biscuits, set out butter and jam on the table, and declared she didn't want the war to continue. A few minutes later, Her mother-in-law proposed a simple solution. Imani would temporarily move in with Keisha, and Jamal would help her rent a studio apartment. If they decided to divorce, they could divide the condo peacefully without going to court. Imani asked what exactly divide meant. Mama Rose replied that her son would probably buy out his wife's share. Though he couldn't offer much for it, after all the scandals with the police, the property had supposedly lost its appeal. She named a figure, $75,000, less than half the market value of the entire condo, and significantly less than the real value of Imani's share, considering her contributions. "How do you know that number?" Imani asked. "Did Jamal do a rough calculation, or has he already spoken to a buyer?" Her mother-in-law looked away too quickly. Just then, Jamal walked into the kitchen and irritably demanded she stop the interrogation. He declared that $75,000 was a generous offer because the mortgage wasn't even paid off yet. If Imani refused, she could expect court battles, appraisals, and years of humiliation in front of the neighbors. Mama Rose immediately added that a second police report would severely worsen her daughter-in-law's situation. They spoke in turns but used the same phrases. Imani realized the amount had been calculated in advance, just like the list of accusations. She didn't argue, only said she needed to think about it, and for the first time, she saw a look of satisfaction on her husband's face. Jamal thought the pressure had worked. He offered to take his wife to Keisha's on the weekend and promised to pack her things himself. Mama Rose even pulled 2 empty suitcases from the storage closet. Imani picked one up, examined it, and calmly put it back. Then she locked herself in her bedroom and set up a small camera she had bought on her way home. The lens was aimed only at the entrance to her room and a part of the common hallway. She left her phone on the charger with the sound recording on. She didn't need to provoke a new lie. The mother and son were so confident of their victory that they were starting to speak openly. Late that evening, Jamal went out to the balcony with his phone. He didn't close the door all the way. Imani heard the word rent and increased the microphone's sensitivity. Her husband was talking to a realtor named Victor. He told him his wife had almost agreed and would be moving out in a few days. After that, he said, they could prepare the agreement to buy out her share for $75,000. Victor warned that the condo was worth significantly more and Imani could order her own appraisal. Jamal replied that after a couple of police calls, she wouldn't be in the mood for appraisals. He was counting on convincing her that a court would deem their cohabitation impossible and force her to sell her share at a discount anyway. But the most important part wasn't the buyout amount. Jamal asked the realtor to find tenants in advance who were willing to pay the first 3 months in cash. He needed the money immediately to pay off an overdue personal loan and repay a debt to a friend. Jamal himself planned to temporarily move into his mother's small apartment. Mama Rose had agreed to endure the cramped space for 6 months if her son then sold their shared condo outright and bought her a bigger place. Imani finally saw the entire scheme. They weren't pushing her out for the peace of an elderly woman. They were destroying her reputation to get her share cheaply, rent out the condo, and use someone else's money to pay off Jamal's debts. After the call, her husband came into the bedroom and asked if she had made a decision. Imani replied that she was ready to discuss the move, as long as all the conditions were put in writing. Jamal couldn't hide his joy. He promised to contact the realtor in the morning and prepare an agreement. Then, for the first time in weeks, he wished her good night. Outside the door, Mama Rose whispered to her son that her daughter-in-law was finally scared of the police. Jamal laughed softly. "The condo will be vacant by the end of the month," he said. "The main thing is that she signs the papers before the next call." Imani stopped the recording and saved the file in 3 different places. Now she knew not only who was making the noise, but why. However, her husband's last words meant that the mother and son were already preparing a new performance. This time, they needed more than just a crash in the hallway. They needed an accusation, after which Imani herself would be afraid to come home. "After tonight, you'll have only 2 options. Sign the agreement or leave here with the police." Jamal placed a new stack of documents on the kitchen table. This time, the papers had been prepared by the realtor, Victor. On top was the agreement for the buyout of Imani's share for $75,000. Underneath was a commitment to vacate the condo within 3 days. Mama Rose sat nearby, sorting through empty plastic bags, as if her daughter-in-law was already packing. Imani slowly read the first page and immediately noticed a dangerous phrase. "Settlement between the parties has been made in full. The parties have no property or financial claims against each other." By signing, she would be confirming receipt of money she had not yet seen. "First, the $75,000 goes into my account, Then I hand over the keys, Imani said calmly. Now you're dictating terms? Her mother-in-law scoffed. We're saving you from a court battle as it is. If you're saving me, why does the document say the money has already been received? Jamal snatched the papers from her hands. He explained it was a standard form and the realtor would fix the wording later. Mama Rose added that a decent woman would trust her husband, not look for a trap in every line. Imani lowered her eyes and quietly said exactly what they wanted to hear. She was tired, afraid of another police call, and ready to discuss the move. Jamal immediately softened. He promised to take her things to Keisha's and even pay the first month's rent. The mother and son exchanged a look. They had mistaken Imani's caution for surrender. During her lunch break, Imani took a copy of the agreement to Mr. Henderson. The lawyer read the document twice and pointed out 3 more clauses. Upon signing, Imani would waive all claims regarding mortgage payments, agree not to contest the value of her share, and confirm the absence of coercion. Furthermore, the money was supposedly to be transferred in cash before signing. No receipt from Jamal or bank confirmation was provided for. They don't just want your share, Mr. Henderson said. They want your signature on a confession that you've already received the $75,000. After that, she would have to prove she never got any money. Imani showed him the recordings from Miss Evelyn's camera, the late-night conversations, and the photos of the list of fabricated incidents. The lawyer advised her not to reveal her entire hand just yet. Jamal and Mama Rose needed to confirm the coercion and the purpose of the false calls in their own words. If they were preparing a new episode, it was important not to stop them from cementing their final version in official statements. That evening, Imani began to pack. She folded a few old sweaters, books, and empty folders into a suitcase. She had taken the original documents, her laptop, and her jewelry to her bank's safe deposit box that morning. Mama Rose peeked into the bedroom several times, offering advice and hurrying her along. She was already discussing what curtains she would hang after her daughter-in-law left and where she would move the bed. Jamal called Victor and, in front of Imani, confirmed that the agreement could be signed on Saturday. However, once he stepped into the hallway, he lowered his voice. The camera near the door recorded the end of the conversation. After the second police report, she'll sign anything, Jamal said. The main thing is that the statement mentions an assault, not just noise. A few minutes later, Mama Rose went to her son. They spoke quietly, but the camera's microphone picked up every word. Her mother-in-law was afraid of falling on the tile floor and suggested faking a blood pressure episode. Jamal replied that an ambulance crew wouldn't confirm an assault without any marks. Then Mama Rose remembered her sore right wrist from the winter. She had bruised it, and it still sometimes swelled up. All she had to do was say that Imani had pushed her near the bathroom. Jamal promised to be a witness. According to their plan, his wife would be terrified of being accused of causing harm to an elderly person and would sign the agreement before the report even reached the detective. Imani listened to the recording on her headphones, sitting in her locked bedroom. Now she knew exactly what they were going to do. But a single conversation might not be enough. Jamal would surely call it a joke or words taken out of context. So, the next day, Imani continued to play the part of the submissive wife. She announced that after work, she would go to Keisha's to arrange her temporary stay. In a text to Jamal, she specified the time. I'll be leaving the condo around 6:40 p.m. and will be back after 9. He replied almost instantly, Good, Mama will try to stay out of your way. Before leaving, Imani turned on both cameras and checked that they were uploading to the cloud. Miss Evelyn agreed to watch the landing through her peephole. Mr. Henderson was waiting for Imani at a cafe across the street, a place with security cameras and receipts printed with the exact time. At 6:37 p.m., she left the condo. Miss Evelyn's camera recorded Imani getting into the elevator. At 6:41 p.m., she paid for a coffee with her credit card. At 6:40 p.m., Mr. Peter. Henderson emailed her a draft of a petition to protect her property rights. Every minute of her absence left a digital trail. 10 minutes later, Jamal peeked out onto the landing. Seeing his wife was gone, he went back inside. The home camera showed Mama Rose coming out of her room, fully dressed, with no signs of pain. She flexed her right hand several times, then placed a bath mat near the bathroom so that its edge was curled up. Jamal dropped a glass on the floor, but it didn't break. He then struck it against the edge of a vanity and carefully scattered the shards near the wall. Mama Rose lay down on the floor herself, straightened her skirt, and asked her son to bring a cold towel for her wrist. After that, Jamal dialed 911. My wife attacked my mother and ran away, he reported. My mother is on the floor. She might have a broken bone. At 7:06 p.m., Jamal called Imani. He was screaming that she had gone too far and demanded she return immediately. Imani put him on speakerphone so Mr. Henderson could hear the conversation. When exactly did I attack your mother? Don't play dumb. At 6:30, you pushed her by the bathroom, broke a glass, and ran off. 6:30? Yeah, 6:30. I saw everything. Imani asked him to repeat the time. Jamal confirmed 6:30 p.m. and added that he wouldn't let his wife get away with it. He hadn't noticed his fatal mistake. At 6:30 p.m., Imani was still in her bedroom, and Mama Rose was calmly talking on the phone in the kitchen. The home camera had recorded that too. The preparation for their performance had only begun after 6:40 p.m. When Imani returned with her lawyer, paramedics and Officer Davis were already in the condo. Mama Rose sat on the couch with a bandage on her wrist, crying. A paramedic explained that there were no signs of a fresh fracture, but an X-ray was needed for a definitive conclusion. Jamal claimed his wife had pushed his mother with such force that she hit the wall. Mama Rose added that Imani had screamed, "I'll get you out of this condo one way or another." Officer Davis separated them into different rooms and demanded individual statements. Imani didn't argue. She only asked if the exact time of the alleged assault would be recorded. Jamal wrote 6:30 p.m. Mama Rose wrote 6:35 p.m. Both wrote that they had personally seen Imani by the bathroom. Jamal also claimed his wife had broken the glass and immediately fled the condo, realizing what she had done. When the statements were signed, Imani handed the officer the receipt from the cafe, the bank notification, and the lawyer's emailed petition. At 6:41 p.m., I was already across the street, she said. But that's not even the most important part. I request that the unedited recording from inside the condo be submitted as evidence. Jamal lunged for the camera hanging near the bedroom and ripped it from the wall. He pulled out the memory card and crushed it in his fist. Mama Rose began to scream that her daughter-in-law had been illegally filming an elderly person. Officer Davis demanded he put the device on the table and warned that destroying evidence would only make his situation worse. Jamal snapped the card with his thumbnail, but Imani didn't even flinch. The recording is already in the cloud. The video appeared on the lawyer's laptop screen. Everyone watched as Mama Rose herself adjusted the rug, lay down on the floor, and asked her son if her pained wrist looked convincing enough. Then, Jamal broke the glass and rehearsed the line about the assault. The room fell so quiet you could hear the paramedic zipping up his medical bag. Mama Rose was the first to make excuses. She claimed she was just showing her son how it had supposedly happened earlier. Jamal said his wife had deliberately driven his mother to a nervous breakdown and was now trying to make her look crazy. Officer Davis placed their two signed statements side by side and asked why neither of them mentioned a reenactment. Neither mother nor son answered. The officer informed them that the files from the previous call would also be reviewed, and now they would have to officially account for providing false information. While Jamal was arguing with the police officer, a message from the realtor, Victor, lit up his phone screen. The phone was face up, visible to everyone. Put down the $100K for you with the buyer. If your wife doesn't sign by Monday, you'll owe him $200. The purchase agreement is already active. Imani read the message twice. Jamal wasn't just planning to buy out her share. He had already promised a stranger he would sell the condo without his wife's consent or the money to pay her. For the sake of this deal, he was willing to make his own mother the victim of a fabricated assault. And now he had 3 days to hide a purchase agreement that Imani was never supposed to know about. If Imani sees the real contract, we'll lose not just the condo, but Mama's apartment, Jamal hissed, thinking his wife was asleep. After the officer left, he and Mama Rose locked themselves in the kitchen. Imani lay in the bedroom without the lights on, listening to their conversation through the camera near the door. Her mother-in-law demanded he immediately get all the papers back from the realtor. Jamal replied that the purchase agreement was held not just by Victor, but also by the buyer. If the deal fell through, he would have to return $200,000. He didn't have the money. Then Mama Rose reminded him of the promissory note against which she had mortgaged her own apartment. That phrase changed everything. His mother wasn't helping her son just to get a more spacious home. Her own one-bedroom apartment was already collateral for a debt Imani knew nothing about. The next morning, Officer Davis came to the condo again. He took copies of the recordings, photographed the realtor's message, and informed Jamal that the destroyed memory card would also be noted in the report. Mama Rose made a show of holding her wrist, although the medical report only confirmed an old sprain. She demanded her daughter-in-law be charged with illegal filming, but the officer reminded her that the camera was inside the property of one of the owners and was filming a common area. Jamal tried to pass the whole thing off as a family misunderstanding. But the two signed statements already contained specific lies: the time of an assault that never happened, a broken glass, and threats Imani never made. Retracting those words without consequences proved much harder than inventing them. As soon as the officer left, Jamal demanded his wife unlock her phone. He swore he only wanted to delete the family recordings that could shame his mother. Imani refused. He then announced that from now on, he wouldn't allow her to be in the condo alone and took the spare key to the bedroom off his keychain. Mama Rose suggested calling a locksmith to change the lock on the front door. Imani calmly reminded them that such an attempt would be documented as obstructing an owner's access to their property. Jamal raised his hand as if to slam it on the table but stopped when he noticed the phone camera pointed at him. For the first time, the fear was not on Imani's face. Mother and son realized that now, their every move could become evidence. At his office, Mr. Henderson advised Imani not to call Victor. The realtor had to be the one to confirm the deal's existence. She didn't have to wait long. Around noon, an unfamiliar number appeared on her screen. Victor spoke quickly and with forced friendliness. He said the documents were almost ready. The buyer was flying in on Monday, and Jamal had already agreed to the terms. All Imani had to do was sign and hand over the keys after the closing. She replied that her husband had shown her a different agreement, one that only mentioned buying out her share. There was a pause on the line. Then Victor said the couple had probably misunderstood each other. The buyer intended to purchase the entire condo for $320,000. And Jamal valued my share at $75,000, Imani said. Where is he getting the rest of the money? The realtor became flustered. First, he claimed the money would come after the sale. Then he let it slip that Jamal had received a large advance months ago. That was why the new contract couldn't be canceled without a penalty. The buyer, an entrepreneur named Marcus Thorne, had given him $50,000 against a promissory note, expecting to acquire the condo at a reduced price. The $100,000 from the text message was money Victor had recently added from his own funds to stop Marcus from demanding immediate repayment of the debt. Imani asked him to send the documents for her to review. 10 minutes later, the purchase agreement arrived in her email, which the realtor called the final technical version. On the last page was the signature of Imani Washington. It only looked similar from a distance. Jamal had copied the slant of the letters but connected the initials incorrectly. Imani never made a long flourish after her last name, but there it was on the document. Next to it was a date when she had been at the seminar in Charlotte. Attached to the contract was a copy of her passport and a statement claiming she agreed to sell the condo but couldn't participate in the preparations personally due to illness. The contact number provided was Mama Rose's. Mr. Henderson printed the email, along with its technical data, and told Imani not to reply. This was no longer just about psychological pressure and false reports. Someone had used her documents and forged her signature on a real estate deal. Victor called back half an hour later. He had already realized he'd sent too much and demanded she delete the file. Imani started recording. "Who gave you the document with my signature?" "Jamal said you signed it at home." "Did you see this personally?" "No, but your mother-in-law brought the papers. She assured me you knew all about it." "Why is Mama Rose listed as the contact person?" The realtor fell silent, then suggested they meet without lawyers. He promised to change the price and waive his commission if Imani didn't go to the police. With that phrase, Victor had definitively confirmed he understood the danger of the documents. Mr. Henderson noted the time of the call and prepared a statement about possible forgery and misuse of passport data. After lunch, Imani received a statement for their joint account. The $50,000 from Marcus Thorne had never been deposited there. Instead, on the date specified in the purchase agreement, a transfer for the same amount had arrived in Jamal's personal account. Within an hour, he had sent $35,000 to his mother and directed the rest to a collection agency. The memo for the first transfer was short: debt repayment. Mama Rose hadn't mortgaged her apartment for a future purchase. She had taken money from a private lender after a disastrous renovation of her investment property and defaults on several loans. Jamal had used a stranger's advance to save her home, while promising the buyer a condo he only half-owned. But his mother's debt wasn't fully cleared. Mr. Henderson found a link in the sent files that Victor had accidentally failed to delete. It led to a copy of Mama Rose's promissory note. If Jamal didn't complete the sale by the end of the month, she was obligated to pay off the remaining amount with her apartment. At the bottom were the signatures of two witnesses: Mama Rose's sister and her husband, Uncle Earl. That's why her mother-in-law was in such a hurry and spoke so confidently about the police. The conspiracy involved not just the mother, son, and realtor. Relatives knew about the debt and were ready to confirm any convenient version of events. Imani remembered how her Aunt May had recently called Jamal and asked, "How much longer is that stubborn girl gonna hold out?" That evening, Mama Rose invited Aunt May and Uncle Earl for dinner. At the table, Aunt May immediately started talking about reconciliation. She urged Imani not to destroy the family over money and to sign the papers for the peace of an elderly person. Uncle Earl added that court battles could drag on for years, and a reputation, once damaged by police complaints, could never be restored. Imani asked if they knew Marcus Thorne. Aunt May dropped her spoon. Mama Rose immediately intervened, claiming she had never heard the name. But Uncle Earl unexpectedly spoke up. But he promised to wait until Monday. Silence fell over the table. Jamal slammed his fist on the table and accused his uncle of being a fool. Uncle Earl turned red, grabbed his jacket, and left without finishing his tea. Imani's camera recorded every word. After the guests left, Jamal changed his tactics. He entered the bedroom without knocking, sat on the edge of the bed, and confessed that he had indeed taken an advance. According to him, his mother could have lost her only home, so he had no choice. He offered Imani an extra $15,000 on top of the original $75,000 if she signed the documents on Monday. When his wife asked about the forged signature, Jamal turned pale. He was silent for a few seconds, then claimed Victor had prepared the papers himself. Mama Rose, overhearing the conversation, burst into the room and screamed that her daughter-in-law had a duty to save the family, having lived off her son for so many years. Imani silently opened her bank's app and showed the history of mortgage payments. 73% of all installments had been made from her checking account. "I'll be there on Monday," she said. "But I'll only sign after I hear the terms in front of everyone." Jamal thought his wife was negotiating. Within an hour, he had informed the relatives that the deal would take place at Victor's office. Mama Rose invited Aunt May and her husband to ensure everything was orderly. Marcus Thorne was coming with his own lawyer, and Victor had arranged for a bank employee to be present to verify the settlement. Jamal wanted to surround Imani with people and force her to yield under collective pressure. He didn't know that Mr. Henderson had already contacted Marcus and sent him just one page of the contract, the one with the forged signature. The buyer's reply was short, "I'll be there on Monday, and this time Jamal is going to tell the truth in front of everyone. Sign here, and no one will ever mention the police again," Jamal said, pushing the contract toward Imani. Everyone he considered part of his pressure campaign was gathered in the realtor's office. Mama Rose sat next to her sister, Aunt May, and Uncle Earl. Victor nervously shuffled papers. Marcus Thorne had arrived with his lawyer, Elena. Mr. Henderson stood by the window, whom Jamal was pointedly ignoring. On the table lay a new version of the agreement. Imani was promised a total of $90,000 if she immediately dropped all claims, vacated the condo, and confirmed her consent to its sale. Jamal spoke slowly, almost tenderly. He was confident the extra $15,000 had finally broken his wife. Imani picked up the pen but didn't uncap it. "Before I sign anything, tell everyone here when I agreed to sell the condo to Marcus Thorne." Jamal looked at Victor, who gave a barely perceptible nod. "January 14th. At home. We were sitting in the kitchen. We discussed the price, and you signed. Mama was there." "Of course," Mama Rose interjected. "I saw you sign it with my own two eyes. You even said you wanted to get the money and leave as soon as possible." Aunt May confirmed that her sister had called her that very evening to tell her about the family's decision. Uncle Earl remained silent, looking down. Imani asked Victor to record these statements in the meeting minutes. The realtor refused, stating that his office was not a court of law. Mr. Henderson then turned on his voice recorder and stated the date, time, and all parties present for the record. Jamal smirked. He still didn't understand why his wife was so insistent on making them repeat the same lie. Imani pulled her travel confirmation, a boarding pass, and a hotel bill from Charlotte out of her folder. On January 14th, she had not been in Atlanta. At 7:12 p.m., she was paying with her card at the hotel restaurant. At 11 p.m., she was scanning her badge at the conference hall entrance. And at 9:40 p.m., she was on a video call with her supervisor. Attached to the letter from the event organizers was a group photo of the attendees with an automatically saved timestamp. Jamal tried to say he had mixed up the date, but Mama Rose had just sworn she called her sister that exact evening. Aunt May turned pale and began to stammer that she could have been mistaken by a few days. The purchase agreement doesn't just have a date, Imani said. It states that the signature was made in the presence of Victor. Which one of you is lying now? Victor abruptly slammed the folder shut. He declared he wasn't obligated to remember every meeting from 6 months ago and might have received the documents from Jamal. Marcus Thorne silently slid a printout of the email the realtor had sent to Imani across the table. The cover text read, "Signed by the parties in my presence. Identities verified." Victor started making excuses about technical language. Then Imani played the recording of their recent phone call. His own voice filled the room, admitting he never saw her sign, that Mama Rose brought the papers, and then offering to change the price and waive his commission if Imani didn't go to the police. Mama Rose jumped up from her chair. "I only delivered an envelope. Jamal said Imani had already signed everything. 5 minutes ago, you claimed you were personally present," Marcus's lawyer, Elena, reminded her. Jamal accused his mother of getting flustered under pressure, then turned to Marcus and suggested they not blow a family squabble out of proportion. According to him, Imani was going to sell the condo anyway, so a mistake in the paperwork didn't change the substance of the deal. For the first time, Marcus raised his voice. He placed the $50,000 promissory note in front of Jamal and demanded an explanation for why, after 6 months, he had received neither a registered contract nor his advance back. Jamal replied that the money was ready, but Imani's bank statement, now displayed on a screen, showed otherwise. The transactions on Jamal's personal account appeared. $50,000 had come in from Marcus. 47 minutes later, $35,000 was transferred to Mama Rose. The rest went to pay off a personal loan. Not a single cent had appeared in the couple's joint account. Mama Rose tried to call the transfer a repayment of an old family debt, but Marcus produced a second promissory note. In it, her mother-in-law confirmed that the money was received from the advance for Imani and Jamal's condo, and in the event the deal fell through, she was obligated to participate in repaying the sum with her own property. The document was co-signed by Aunt May and Uncle Earl. "Did you know Imani hadn't given her consent?" Marcus asked. "I was told she would agree," Uncle Earl answered quietly. Mama Rose swore we just needed to put a little pressure on her. Aunt May grabbed his arm, but he pulled away. Uncle Earl confessed he had seen a printed-out plan of complaints against Imani. Mama Rose had explained to the relatives that the police were only needed to make her daughter-in-law make a decision faster. Aunt May remained silent, but the recording of the recent dinner already held her words about reputation, courts, and the Monday deadline. Imani laid out the list of fabricated breakdowns, her work records, and call logs on the table. Then, the video from the condo appeared on the large screen. Mama Rose herself, adjusting the rug, lying down by the bathroom, while Jamal broke a glass and called the police to report an assault. No one in the room moved. Mama Rose stared at her own image, calmly checking her sore wrist before the performance. Jamal tried to demand the recording be turned off, but Marcus stopped him. The late-night conversation on the balcony followed, Jamal discussing tenants, cash payments, and the lowball buyout of his wife's share with Victor. Then Mama Rose's voice, saying she'd agree to have her son in her small apartment for 6 months if he bought her a bigger place after the sale. All the explanations about saving the family vanished. All that remained were debts, a stranger's advance, and a plan to destroy Imani's reputation. "You wanted me to move out voluntarily," she said. "Then you were going to rent out the condo, take my share for cheap, and sell the whole place. To do that, you gave false information to the police 3 times and staged an assault." Jamal leaped to his feet. He screamed that the recordings were illegal, the documents were stolen, and his wife had planned to destroy the family from the start. Miss Henderson reminded him that some of the evidence had already been given to the precinct detective, and a report about the forged signature had been filed that morning. Imani added the statement about her down payment. $90,000 had been transferred by her parents. 73% of the mortgage payments had come from her checking account. The condo was not a gift from Jamal, as his mother had claimed. It was Imani who had invested the majority of the family's money into it. Marcus Thorne turned to his lawyer. Elena announced that her client was withdrawing from the deal and would be sending a demand for the return of his advance, plus the contractual penalty. A separate complaint would be filed regarding the use of a forged signature. Victor immediately claimed he was only acting on Jamal's word. Jamal, in turn, pointed at his mother. "She's the one who brought the passport copy and signature samples. I just gave the documents to Victor." Mama Rose slammed her palm on the table. "And who sat up nights practicing how to write her last name? Who said no one would ever order a handwriting analysis because Imani would be too scared of the police?" Mother and son fell silent at the same time. They realized they had just started blaming each other in front of witnesses and a running recorder. Victor tried to grab the preliminary contract, but Marcus covered it with his hand. At that moment, the office door opened. Officer Davis walked in with a detective who was handling the investigation into Imani's complaint. They didn't arrest anyone. They calmly stated the registered case number and asked for the original contract, promissory notes, and electronic correspondence to be handed over voluntarily. Victor claimed the original was lost, but Marcus pulled his copy from his briefcase. It had the same forged signature of Imani, and on the back, Victor's own handwritten note verifying the documents. "Now each of you will give a separate statement," the detective said, "and you'd better decide right now which story you're going to stick to." Jamal approached Imani, lowering his voice. He offered to return Marcus's money, call off the sale, and start over. He swore he was only acting for his mother's sake and was afraid to admit his debts. Imani looked at the man who, just a few days ago, was ready to accuse her of assaulting an elderly woman. "You can only start over when the past is finished," she replied. "Our marriage ended the minute you decided my signature could be replaced by your lie." She handed Mr. Henderson the divorce petition and asset settlement paperwork. Jamal saw the date on the document. It had been drafted even before the staged assault. While he thought his wife was intimidated, she had already been closing off every escape route he planned to use. But it was Mama Rose who had the last word. Realizing her son had thrown her under the bus for the passport and the forgery, she took out her phone and opened the text thread she had been saving all this time as insurance. "If my apartment is going to be lost over his debts," she said, "I'll show everyone who really came up with the police calls." On the screen was a message from Jamal. "After the third report, she'll either sign or I'll get her declared a danger. We'll save your apartment then." Imani took a photo of it. Now, mother and son could no longer present a united front. Ahead lay a handwriting analysis, Marcus's lawsuit, a divorce, and a battle for the condo. But the most important thing had already happened right there in the office. The conspiracy, built on family loyalty, had crumbled the moment each of them needed to save only themselves. "If you drop the charges, I'll give you my share of the condo," Jamal said in the hallway of the police department. Imani stopped but didn't turn around. Just a week ago, he had been threatening to take her home, calling her dangerous, and rehearsing a fabricated assault with his mother. Now his voice was quiet, almost pleading. Jamal explained that Marcus was demanding the $200,000 back, including the penalty. Victor was blaming him for everything, and Mama Rose had handed over their entire text history to the investigator. According to Jamal, only his wife could stop this machine. Imani looked at the paper he held out. It wasn't an agreement to transfer his share, but a statement in which she was supposed to call the family conflict a misunderstanding and confirm that she had previously discussed selling the condo. He was once again offering her not property, but a new lie. "Even when you have nothing left to bargain with, you still try to pay with my signature," Imani replied. She handed the paper to Mr. Henderson. The lawyer photographed the document and asked Jamal to repeat his offer with the recorder on. He immediately backpedaled, claiming his wife had misunderstood. But at the bottom of the page was his own handwritten note. "Upon dropping the charges, I will surrender my claim to the condo." Jamal had brought yet another piece of evidence of coercion himself. In the interrogation room, he faced questions about Imani's passport copy, the signature samples, and the messages where he promised to have his wife declared a danger after the third police call. Mama Rose was in the next room. Now, mother and son were giving separate testimonies, and they were blaming each other. The handwriting analysis took over a month. Until the end, Jamal insisted that Victor had signed the document, while the realtor claimed he received the papers in a sealed envelope. But experts found several practice attempts to replicate Imani's last name on some draft papers. The documents were discovered during a search of Jamal's desk. He hadn't had time to destroy them because he had spent the night at his mother's after the meeting at the office, and Imani had already changed the locks, notifying him and passing along a spare key through her lawyer. In an old notebook, the same signature was repeated over 4 pages. On the 5th, in Mama Rose's handwriting, was a note. Shorter, "She does the tale like this." After the expert's conclusion, Victor changed his story. He admitted he knew Imani hadn't personally signed anything. Jamal had assured him his wife was on board, but was deliberately dragging out the process to get more money. The realtor had been hoping for an extra cash commission for speeding up the deal. Victor handed over their correspondence, voice messages, and a copy of a spreadsheet where Jamal had calculated the future profits from renting the condo. It was there that the final part of the plan was discovered. After selling to Marcus, Jamal planned to offer him compensation to back out of the purchase, find another buyer at a higher price, and keep the difference for himself. By then, Imani was supposed to have received her $90,000 and disappeared from his life. Marcus filed a civil suit for the return of his advance and damages. The court placed a lien on Jamal's share of the condo to prevent him from transferring the property to his mother. Mama Rose demanded that her son immediately return her $35,000. But he no longer had the money. Part of it went to the private lender, part to overdue bills. She had spent the rest on renovating her investment property, hoping to sell it for a profit in the spring. Now she had to list the house in the winter for almost a third less than she expected. The relatives she had enlisted as witnesses refused to help. Aunt May claimed she had been deceived, and Uncle Earl gave the investigator the printed list of complaints against Imani. Jamal tried to delay the divorce. He demanded all mortgage payments be considered equal, argued that Imani's parents' money was a gift to both of them, and asked for the condo to be awarded to him since his mother supposedly needed care. Miss Henderson presented the bank transfer for $90,000, Imani's correspondence with her parents, and the settlement statement from her grandmother's house sale. In the payment memo, her father had specified for daughter's down payment on condo. Mama Rose tried to claim she had personally given the young couple a large sum in cash. The court asked for the source of the money. Her mother-in-law first mentioned savings, then an inheritance, but couldn't provide a single piece of proof. The deciding factor wasn't the size of the monthly payments, but Imani's proven personal contribution and Jamal's behavior after receiving the stranger's advance. The parties only reached a settlement when it became clear that his share would remain under a lien until the dispute with Marcus was resolved. Imani won the right to buy out his share at an independent appraisal value, taking into account her parents' documented contribution. She paid the amount through a bank escrow account, borrowing part of it from her parents and formalizing everything. From the sum due to Jamal, the bank paid off the remainder of the mortgage, and the rest went to satisfy Marcus's claims. Jamal walked away from the deal with almost no money. The condo he had tried to sell in secret, Imani kept for herself. On the day the final agreement was signed, Mama Rose came to the title company with her son. She demanded to be let into the condo to retrieve furniture, dishes, and a television, claiming she had bought everything for the young family. Imani had already packed the items belonging to her mother-in-law: 2 sets of china, an old armchair, a box of towels, and a floor vase. On each item was a photo of a receipt or a message from Mama Rose confirming ownership. The television and furniture had been paid for by Imani, so they stayed in the condo. Her mother-in-law screamed that her daughter-in-law was throwing her son out with nothing. The escrow officer reminded her that Jamal had voluntarily signed the agreement and received a full settlement, which had been directed to his creditor. "You were supposed to join our family, not destroy it," Mama Rose shouted. "My door didn't destroy this family," Imani replied calmly. "Your signatures on a lie did." Jamal moved into his mother's one-bedroom apartment. The very home where Mama Rose had agreed to put up with him for 6 months became their only shared refuge. The investment property was sold, but the proceeds weren't enough to cover all the debts. His mother-in-law had to forego her repairs and transfer part of her income to the creditor each month. Aunt May stopped answering her sister's calls. The neighbors, whom Mama Rose had once tried to convince of her daughter-in-law's danger, learned about the staged police calls from Miss Evelyn. She didn't spread gossip, only showed the recording once to those who continued to blame Imani. After that, the sympathizers disappeared on their own. The investigation into the false report, the attempt to use a forged document, and the coercion against Imani continued. Jamal and Mama Rose were no longer a united front. The son claimed his mother suggested faking the fall. The mother showed messages where he planned the number of police calls. Victor provided documents proving he had been misled, but the audio recording of him offering to stay silent in exchange for a price stripped him of that convenient defense. Imani didn't follow every hearing. Mr. Henderson only updated her on what was important. It was enough for her to know that no broken memory card, no deleted file, and no rewritten statement could ever break the chain of evidence she had assembled. In the spring, Imani renovated the condo. She didn't make a big show of changing everything, as if trying to erase the past. She just repainted the hallway, got rid of Mama Rose's armchair, and replaced the bedroom door where the first camera had hung. Miss Evelyn brought her a sweet potato pie, and Keisha helped her unpack boxes. When the workers removed a kitchen shelf, another folded piece of paper was found behind it. It was an old list of expenses written by Jamal: rental costs, the estimated sale price, Victor's commission, and the amount he intended to give Imani. Next to her name was a single word: convince. Imani didn't throw the paper away. She gave it to her lawyer as one last confirmation that what had happened was not a sudden family quarrel. A few months later, Jamal was waiting for Imani by the entrance of her building. He looked older, held a bag with his remaining things, and spoke without his former confidence. He told her that his mother blamed him daily for losing the investment property. Marcus hadn't forgiven any part of the debt, and his job had found out about the investigation. Jamal asked if he could come up to the condo just one more time. He wanted to see the rooms and talk without lawyers, cameras, or witnesses. Imani took the bag but didn't open the door. "I never thought it would go this far," he said. "If you had just agreed from the start, nobody would have gotten hurt." Imani realized he still didn't understand anything. In his world, the guilty party was still the woman who refused to voluntarily give up her property, sign a lie, and disappear. Jamal didn't regret his actions, only that his plan had failed. She handed the bag back to him. Inside were Mama Rose's documents, which her mother-in-law had accidentally left in a closet. There was nothing left between them. "You counted on my silence and thought it was weakness," Imani said. "But I was only being quiet so I could hear every word as you confessed to everything." She walked into the building and closed the door. In her home, there were no more strange keys, no demands to sign papers, and no sound of her mother-in-law's footsteps in the hallway. All that remained were her name on a real deed of ownership, her career intact, and a life in which no one was allowed to decide for her. For the first time, the silence wasn't a warning of danger. It belonged to Imani,